It's one of those frustrating things in cybersecurity. You put up all these defenses, all these walls, and attackers still find ways in. Maybe it's a phishing email that just looks convincing.
Happens all the time. Or, a vulnerability that hasn't been patched yet.
Right. Or compromised credentials. The point is, those initial defenses, well, they aren't always foolproof.
Exactly. And that's precisely why a really robust security strategy has to include proactively looking for threats that might have slipped past.
Like sending in detectives after a break-in.
Kind of, yeah. To look for clues that someone's already inside. The really big goal here is cutting down that dwell time.
The time they're lurking around undetected.
Precisely. The less time they have free reign, the less damage they can actually do. It's critical.
So, okay, that's our focus for this deep dive then. Building that proactive detective capability, behavioral threat hunting.
That's it.
And we're digging into the practical side, using insights from Intel 471's threat hunting framework, which you said is based on real-world stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. This isn't just theory. It comes directly from the experiences of, actual hunt teams doing this day in, day out.
Grounded in practice. Okay.
But look, building this capability, it's not exactly a walk in the park. Organizations face some pretty big challenges.
I bet. Like what?
Well, the SANS-SUDA's 2025 threat hunting survey really highlighted one, the skills gap, finding people with the right expertise.
Yeah, that makes sense.
A massive 61% said that was their number one obstacle.
Wow, 61%. That's huge. And it's probably a pretty niche skill set.
Right, it really is. And then there's the whole challenge of, proving its value.
How do you measure stopping something bad that didn't actually happen?
Exactly. It's tricky. Plus, you've got the technical hurdles, making sure you even have the right data, the right tools, and just having a clear process, a plan.
Right, the fundamentals.
And all this gets tougher because attackers are getting smarter, more sophisticated. We're seeing this huge rise in living off the land tactics.
Using the system's own tools against itself.
You got it. They use legitimate tools already on your network to blend in, avoid detection. It's pretty worrying. Think about it. 76% of nation-state attacks.
76?
And nearly half, 49% of ransomware attacks are using LOTL now. That's up significantly.
Which just screams, we need to be proactive.
Yes.
Doesn't it? You can't just wait for an alarm bell for that kind of attack.
Precisely. And it seems like organizations are, getting the message. That same SANS survey showed a real shift towards bringing threat hunting in-house.
How interesting.
Yeah, 58% are managing it internally now in 2025. That's up from, I think, 46% the year before. So clearly there's a desire for more control, more internal skill.
Right, building that capability inside. Okay, so let's define this properly. Threat hunting. It's not just another security tool you buy off the shelf.
No, definitely not. It's a methodology, a structured way to actively search for threats that your automated systems, your standard defenses might have missed. And the main goal isn't just finding those hidden threats, but also figuring out the security gaps that let them in and then, developing ways to plug those gaps for the future.
Got it. So it's a continuous loop. Find something, fix the root cause, get better.
Exactly. It's iterative. It's proactive. It's not just about searching for those little known bad things like specific file hashes or IP addresses, what we call atomic indicators of compromise or IOCs.
Right. The easy stuff to change.
Yeah. Threat hunting uses behavioral analysis, statistical analysis. It's about looking for suspicious activity, understanding the how of an attack, the tactics, not just the specific tool they use that one time.
And that leads us to behavioral threat hunting specifically, driven by regulations maybe, but also these advanced attacks. We're hunting for their TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures.
That's the heart of it. And to do that well, teams use a mix of their own internal data logs, telemetry, and external cyber threat intelligence, CTI.
Yeah.
They use this intel to build what's called hunt content. Think of hunt content as specific queries or searches.
Like questions you ask your security tools.
Exactly. Questions you run against your EDR, your XDR, your SIM, maybe a data lake, designed specifically to look for those suspicious behaviors, those TTPs, that you expect attackers might be using based on the intelligence.
Okay, so it's like having a library of searches based on known attacker playbooks. Now, the framework we're looking at, it mentions different approaches, different methodologies.
Yeah, there are a few established ways to think about it. Tahiti, for instance, that's very intelligence-driven. It really stresses the feedback loop you're hunting, informs your intel, and your intel guides your hunting.
Makes sense.
Then you've got the pyramid of pain, Heard of that?
Vaguely, yeah. The idea is that some indicators are harder for attackers to change than others.
Exactly. Hunting for TTPs, their core behaviors, is way up the pyramid. It causes them much more pain because it's harder to change than, say, an IP address down at the bottom. So focusing hunts there gives you much better, longer-lasting security value.
Right, hit them where it hurts.
And then, of course, there's IMARI, ATT, and CK. Lots of teams use that framework to map out attacker techniques and see where their own defenses might be strong or where they have gaps.
So it helps visualize your coverage. It seems like you might use elements from all of these depending on the situation.
Absolutely. They're lenses to view the problem, but whichever methodology you lean towards, the real keys are consistency, rigor, and making sure your hunts are repeatable.
You need a solid process.
You really do. And this actually is where leveraging external hunt content can be super helpful, especially with that skills shortage we talked about.
So you can use pre-built, validated searches.
It gives your team a starting point, maybe broadens the scope of what they can look for effectively, even if they don't have deep expertise in every single area yet.
Kind of like a force multiplier for the team you have.
Oh, okay.
So let's say you run a hunt. What comes out of it? What are the deliverables, the benefits, even if you don't find, an active hacker?
Right. Good question. There are several key outputs. First, that intelligence feedback loop is huge. What you discover or don't discover feeds back into your threat intel, makes it sharper, more relevant.
Which then makes the next hunt better.
Exactly. It's that cycle again.
Mm-hmm.
Then, a really important one, new threat detections.
Okay.
When you find something sneaky during a hunt, something your automated tools missed, the goal is to analyze it, understand it, and then build a new automated way to catch it next time.
So you turn the unknown into a known threat.
Precisely. You automate the detection so your regular security operations, your COps team, can handle it going forward. You don't want to keep manually hunting for the same thing over and over.
That makes a lot of sense. Efficiency. What else?
You still get traditional indicators of compromised IOCs. Even though you're focused on behavior, you'll uncover specific malicious files, domains, IPs.
The breadcrumb.
Yeah. And those IOCs can be fed straight into your firewalls, your endpoint protection, whatever, for immediate blocking. So it strengthens those existing controls too.
Okay, so it supports the traditional defenses as well.
Definitely. And here's one that's maybe less obvious but really valuable. Red team enhancement.
How does that work?
Well, the real-world attacker techniques and tactics you uncover in your hunts, that's gold dust for your red team. They can use those insights to design more realistic attack simulations.
So the red team can mimic what you're actually seeing adversaries do in your environment.
Exactly. Makes their exercises much more effective at testing your actual defenses against relevant threats.
That's clever. Okay.
Then there are runbooks and mitigations. Good threat hunting leads to better documentation. You create runbooks detailing how to perform specific hunts again in the future.
So you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Right. And you document recommendations for fixing the underlying issues, the vulnerabilities or misconfigurations you found. These docs are vital for future hunts and also for guiding incident response.
If this happens again, here's the playbook.
You got it. And that leads to the final point. Successful hunts often drive incident response engagements. If you do find an active intrusion.
You sound the alarm.
Right. The hunt team hands it off smoothly to the incident response, IR team, but they hand it off with context. Here's what we found, here's how we found it, here are the runbooks, here are the recommended fixes.
So the IR team isn't starting from scratch. They get a head start.
Exactly. Makes their response faster and much more effective.
Okay, so threat hunting clearly does a lot more than just find bad guys. It strengthens the whole security ecosystem. So to do this properly, what do you actually need? What are the prerequisites?
The framework breaks it down into a few key areas. First is emulation and validation.
Meaning?
You need a way to safely simulate attacker techniques in your own environment, like a cyber firing range.
Okay.
This lets you test your detection capabilities. Did our tools actually pick up this technique? And also validate your response procedures before a real incident happens. It helps you see how things would actually play out.
Like running drills. Makes sense.
Then, maybe the most obvious, technological prerequisites. Threat hunting lives and dies by visibility.
You can't hunt what you can't see.
Exactly. So you need comprehensive data logging and telemetry, primarily from your network and your endpoints. Detailed logs are crucial.
And the more detailed, the better, I assume.
Generally, yes. The framework talks about tool and deployment gaps. This is a big one. You might have the security tools.
But maybe they're not configured right or not deployed everywhere.
Exactly. Maybe your network proxy isn't logging everything it should, or your endpoint agent isn't on critical servers. Those gaps create blind spots where threats can hide.
So tool setup and coverage are critical. And all this data, that must mean storage challenges, right?
Oh yeah. More visibility equals way more data. Organizations often see a pretty big jump in storage needs when they start collecting richer logs for hunting.
And how long do you need to keep it?
Well, there's guidance suggesting potentially up to 18 months for some logs, especially for incident discovery,
Yep.
and maybe around 200 days just to understand how malware might persist. It adds up.
Wow, okay. That's a lot of data.
Mm-hmm.
So you need somewhere to put it and, more importantly, analyze it.
Absolutely. You need an analysis platform. Usually this is your SAME or maybe a dedicated data analytics platform. The key isn't just storage, but the ability to enrich the data, correlate information from different sources, and visualize patterns.
Bringing it all together to spot the anomalies.
Right. You need to connect the dots. Specialized threat hunting platforms exist, sure, but a powerful SAM or data platform is the essential foundation.
Okay, that covers the tech. What about the people? The hunters themselves, what skills do they need? Is there like an ideal threat hunter profile?
It's interesting. The framework actually pushes back on the idea of finding one perfect hunter. It stresses building a successful team with diverse, complementary skills.
Like the Avengers of security, different specialists.
Something like that. You need different perspectives. The framework points to 4 key skill areas. First, an offensive mindset.
Thinking like an attacker.
Exactly. People like security researchers, maybe threat intel analysts who understand attacker motivations and methods. Second, security architecture knowledge.
The defenders. People who know the systems.
Right. Network security folks, application security experts. Yeah. People who understand how your environment is built, how data flows, where the controls are, and crucially, how they might be bypassed.
Okay, makes sense. What else?
Third, strong data analysis skills. This is huge. Someone who can sift through massive data sets and spot the weird stuff, the outliers, the patterns. This might not even be a traditional security person. It could be someone with a data science background.
Interesting. Bringing in different analytical skills.
Yeah. And finally, organizational and core systems knowledge. This is often your veterans, the people who've been with the organization a while.
They know where the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking.
Aha.
Yeah. They understand the critical business processes, the key systems, the privileged access points. That deep internal knowledge is invaluable for prioritizing hunts and understanding context.
So it's really about blending these different strengths. Absolutely. And the team needs maturity. They need to understand that not every hunt will find a smoking gun, and that's okay. Finding gaps, improving visibility, those are wins too. And collaboration is key, especially with threat intel and the main CCOPS team.
It really sounds like a team sport. Now, organizations starting this, they don't just flip a switch and become expert hunters overnight, do they?
Yeah.
The framework mentions maturity levels.
Right. It's a journey. The framework outlines 3 broad levels. Level 1 is starting or ad hoc.
What does that look like?
These orgs mostly just react to alerts from their existing tools, like their SIME. They might have some log aggregation, but probably no dedicated threat intelligence function. They often struggle with, finding the right people, having defined processes, or even just dedicating time for proactive hunting.
So mostly reactive, putting out fires.
Pretty much. Then you move up to reactive. These organizations generally have better visibility, better data, they can do more structured hunting, but often their focus is still driven by, say, a new vulnerability report or a major threat bulletin.
So they're hunting, but maybe not always setting their own agenda.
Kind of. They might produce some useful internal intelligence, and they probably use more hypothesis-driven approaches sometimes, but they might still lack the time or resources to be consistently proactive. They're getting there, but still often playing catch-up.
Okay. And the top level?
That's proactive. These teams have usually figured out the staffing piece. They're actively developing their own hunt content, their own detection rules based on what they see. They often contribute back to the community, sharing findings.
They're leading the way. What are their challenges?
Their main challenges often become, ironically, managing the sheer volume of potential hunts and continuously demonstrating the value, the ROI, of their proactive work to the business.
Right, back to that proving a negative problem. So the goal is to get to that proactive stage. To help teams get there and operate consistently, the framework outlines a specific process, the threat hunting cycle.
Yes, exactly. The cycle provides that structure we talked about, making hunts consistent, rigorous, repeatable. It's a 6-step loop. First step, hypothesis.
Setting the objective for the hunt.
Right. What are we looking for? What question are we trying to answer? This hypothesis can come from anywhere: CTI reports, a new vulnerability disclosure, something weird seen in logs, past incidents, or just a hunch from an experienced hunter.
Can you give an example?
Sure. A formal one might be: we hypothesize that adversaries are using DNS tunneling for command and control, detectable by analyzing unusual query volumes and types. Or, simpler, let's investigate PowerShell execution logs for suspicious script block content.
Okay, so the starting point. What's step 2?
Requirements. Once you have the hypothesis, you figure out what you need to test it. What data sources, network logs, endpoint logs, authentication logs, what tools. Do you need specific scripts?
Basically gathering your toolkit and data for this specific mission.
Exactly. And this is where you often identify those visibility gaps we mentioned earlier. It's crucial to note those down. We can't test this fully because we lack X data, both for the current hunt's limitations and for future improvement planning.
Documenting the blind spots.
Okay.
Next.
Plan. You create a formal hunt plan. This details the hypothesis, the requirements, data, tools, the expected time frame, who's involved, any external help needed, relevant playbooks, how you'll report findings, and importantly, lessons learned from previous similar hunts.
The blueprint for this specific operation.
Yes. Then step 4 is the hunt itself. Execution. You run the queries, you analyze the data according to plan, and you meticulously document everything you find: true positives, false positives, true negatives, anything interesting, any roadblocks you hit.
Conducting the search and taking detailed notes.
Right. Then comes step 5. Enrich. This is super important. If you did find something malicious and previously unknown.
The unknown unknown.
Right. You need to analyze it deeply, understand how it works so you can build that automated detection we talked about earlier, create the new rule, the new signature, whatever it is.
Transitioning it to CCOPS.
Exactly. You also document this new detection logic and update all your runbooks and knowledge bases with what you learned, especially about false positives, to make future hunts more efficient.
Refining the process. Okay, last step.
Post-hunt. This is about closing the loop and improving. Gather feedback from everyone involved: the hunters, any support teams like IT, the people who receive the output like IR or CCOPS. What went well? What could be better next time?
Continuous improvement.
Yes. And a huge part of this is reporting and metrics. This goes back to demonstrating value. Reports provide the tactical details of the hunt. Metrics provide the strategic overview for leadership. How many hunts did we run? What types? What were the outcomes?
And those outcomes aren't just we caught a bad guy, right?
Definitely not. The framework makes a point of this. Even if a hunt finds no active threat, successful outcomes include things like increased visibility, identifying tool misconfigurations, improving IR readiness, finding policy violations, validating existing controls, enhancing team knowledge, all valuable contributions to security posture.
So lots of ways a hunt can be successful beyond finding malware. Now, as teams grow and run more hunts, managing all this, it sounds complex. You mentioned tools.
Yeah, absolutely. As you scale up, you really need centralized hunt management and metrics tools for consistency, for collaboration, and critically, for measuring that risk reduction over time.
Tracking progress.
Exactly. Tracking things like which threats or TTPs have we hunted for? Which ones did we find? What mitigations resulted? How many new detections were created? How has our overall posture or visibility improved?
A dashboard for the hunt program.
Pretty much. The framework mentions Intel 471's Hunter platform, specifically its hunt management module, as an example. Tools like this help track metrics, coordinate hunts among team members, manage all your hunt queries and the context around them, document findings.
Keep it all organized.
Right. And some platforms like Hunter also allow a bring your own hunt capability, so you can manage your custom developed hunts using the same process and tracking as any prepackaged content you might use.
That integration sounds useful. And speaking of prepackaged content, you mentioned external hunt content earlier.
Yeah, platforms like Hunter often provide libraries of pre-validated hunt packages. These aren't just simple queries. They usually include the hypothesis, required data sources, the query itself, and crucially, the context why you should run this hunt, what threat actor or TTP it relates to, based on real-time threat intelligence.
So it shortcuts the research and development.
Exactly. It allows teams, especially those maybe still building expertise, to leverage high-quality, intelligence-driven hunts much faster. Helps overcome that skills gap and detect threats quicker.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, digging into the actual hunting in action part, the framework differentiates between structured and unstructured hunting.
Yes. Structured hunting is also called hypothesis-based. Like we discussed in the cycle, it starts with a specific testable theory, usually driven by good threat intelligence. More mature, proactive teams tend to do more of this.
The targeted investigation.
Right. Unstructured hunting is more exploratory, sometimes called data-based. You dive into the data without a firm hypothesis, looking for anomalies, outliers, anything that just looks weird.
Fishing expedition.
Sort of, yeah. Newer teams, or those in a more reactive mode, might start here. Techniques like finding the least seen item, stacking similar data, or statistical clustering are common in unstructured hunting. You're letting the data guide you to potential problems.
Two different approaches for different situations or maturity levels, and then there are specific tactics.
Right. The framework outlines a few strategic approaches. Intelligence-driven, using CTI to form hypotheses, probably the most common for mature teams. Target-driven, focusing your hunts on your most critical assets, the crown jewels, key servers, sensitive data repositories.
Protecting what matters most.
Exactly. And technique-driven, picking a specific attacker technique, maybe from MITRE AT&CK, like credential dumping, and hunting for any instance of that technique across the environment.
Trying to root out a whole class of behavior.
Precisely. And finally, within those tactics, you use various threat hunting techniques, the specific analytical methods.
Okay, like what?
Volume analysis is a big one. Looking at the amount of something compared to the baseline, like a huge spike in outbound traffic from one machine, that warrants investigation.
Data exfiltration, maybe.
Could be. Or maybe top talkers on the network, unusually high numbers of failed logins. Frequency analysis looks at how often something happens. Think malware beacons calling home on a regular schedule. Analyzing the timing can reveal C2 traffic.
Looking for regularity.
Right. Clustering analysis uses stats to group data points with similar characteristics. Things that fall outside the main clusters are outliers, potentially suspicious. Grouping analysis looks for things happening together under certain conditions, like maybe multiple endpoints suddenly start communicating with a new unknown DNS server simultaneously.
A coordinated change of behavior.
Yeah. And stack counting, or just stacking, is really useful. You aggregate and count occurrences of specific data fields in a data set.
Like counting all the different web browser user agent strings.
Exactly, or process names, file paths, destination ports. You look for the rare stuff. If 99% of your traffic uses common user agents, but you see one or two connections with a really weird, unique one, that's highly suspicious. Could be a custom hacking tool.
Finding the needle in the haystack by counting the hay.
That's a good way to put it. It's about finding statistical outliers that often indicate malicious or unusual activity.
Okay, so it's this combination of understanding attacker behavior, knowing your environment, and applying these data analysis techniques. Looking long-term now, what are the biggest strategic benefits of building up this whole capability? Why make the investment?
Well, the long-term payoff is significant. Firstly, it really drives strategic decisions about your security program.
How so?
The insights you get from hunting, where your visibility gaps are, which tools are effective or not, that directly informs your security roadmap. Helps you prioritize investments, justify budgets, and make smarter choices about technology and process improvements.
So it provides real data to guide security strategy.
Exactly. Secondly, it's fundamental for identifying current and future threats. You're not just waiting for known threats, you're actively looking for targeted attacks aimed at you, and also for those general malicious behaviors that could indicate novel or emerging threats. It keeps you ahead of the curve.
Proactive defense against the unknown.
Right. And finally, it helps maximize the ROI on your people and technology. Threat hunting really leverages the deep skills and institutional knowledge within your team, and it forces you to make better use of the security tools you already own, squeezing more value out of that expensive telemetry data they generate.
Getting the most out of your investments, both human and tech.
Precisely. It makes the whole security operation smarter and more effective over time.
Well, this has been incredibly insightful, a really comprehensive deep dive into behavioral threat hunting. It's abundantly clear that just relying on those traditional walls and alarms isn't enough anymore, not with how sophisticated threats have become.
Yeah, the landscape keeps shifting.
Threat hunting provides that absolutely critical proactive layer. It empowers organizations to, find and deal with those attackers who do inevitably slip through the cracks.
And it's so important to stress again, it doesn't replace your traditional CCOPS. It complements and enhances it.
Right.
The findings feed back into everything. Better intel, smarter detections, faster incident response. It lifts the whole security posture.
And platforms like the Intel 471 one you mentioned, with those pre-built hunt packages.
Yeah.
Based on real TDPs.
Yeah.
they sound like a valuable way to accelerate things.
They can definitely help teams jumpstart their efforts or scale up, leveraging that constantly updated intelligence from real-world threat actor activity and managing the whole process more efficiently.
So for you listening, as you think about your own organization's defenses, maybe take a moment. Consider the visibility you actually have across your network, your endpoints. Where could those hidden threats be lurking? What's one hypothesis, even a simple one, you could form today to start your own threat hunting journey? It's really a crucial step towards being truly proactive.
Yeah, maybe think about this. What are your organization's absolute crown jewels? The data, the systems that would be most devastating if compromised. That's often a really good place to start forming those initial hunting hypotheses. Where would an attacker most likely target you?